Yes.
Test. Test.
When it's red, it's, oh, I'm so sorry. It's here. You might want to explain that to people. Do you see where it's red?
So that's
Hello. I'm feeling quite powerful. Libby loaned this to me. Good afternoon and welcome to the first meeting of the task force for the DMV Moves. My name is Nuria Fernandez and I will be serving as facilitator of the task force meetings throughout this 11-month journey. Before we get started with the agenda and presentations, I wanted to add a safety message, and the safety message really is for the benefit of all of us. Some of you may be familiar with this building, but if you're not, should there be a fire alarm or a distress signal, we want all of you to exit through the back door, so the door that's behind you. You go towards, there is a hand sanitizer dispenser on your right, and that's where the stairwell is. You take the stairwell down to the first floor, exit through the library to the front of the building on Clarendon. Also, there are restrooms. The restrooms are out the back door, main entrance to this boardroom to your left. And for those of you who are seated at the table, the task force members, there aren't sufficient microphones for everyone, so you will need to share. You would need to speak directly into the microphones as the meeting is a live stream. And also, there is a red ring around the head of the microphone that lets you know that your microphone is hot. So when you're finished speaking, make sure that you turn that off. When we go through the presentations and get to the place of discussion, where questions will be encouraged and entertained, I will ask all of the task force members to take your table tent and turn it vertically so that we can, in an orderly way, address each of you and grant you an opportunity to ask your questions or make your comments. So this, now I'm going to turn to introductions, and we'll ask the co-chairs of the task force to say a few words.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charles Allen. I'm the Ward 6 council member in the District of Columbia and very proud to be your co-chair for the DMV Moves Task Force. So officially, on behalf of my co-chair, Paul Smedberg, we are honored to bring everybody together and welcome you here for our task force meeting. We've talked about this before, but over the course of this coming year, we have a significant challenge in front of us, but also a significant opportunity. And I'm very excited that we essentially have an unprecedented opportunity to propel our region forward, to help think about how we create a cohesive and unified vision for transit and transportation across our region, how we could put WMATA on stable financial footing, align our rider experience and use, and no matter where you are across our region. It is certainly a big challenge, but it is one that I know we're up to, and it's one that, frankly, we have to meet. And I appreciate everybody coming in with that kind of shared sense of priority to do that work. I want to thank, in particular, the COG and WMATA staff, who have done a lot of the groundwork to help pull these materials together. So thank you all very much for doing that. And also to each of you, aligning your calendars so that we have everybody here, and to do this over the next year is really important. We also have established 2 advisory groups. We have one of community partners that is led by Greater Washington Board of Trade CEO Jack McDougall, and one of government partners, which is led by Fairfax County Executive Brian Hill. I want to thank both of those leaders for helping out to be at the table and help provide input and direction as we tackle this opportunity. From a housekeeping perspective, I'll add what Ms. Fernandez said. Apparently there is a room right back there where there will be coffee, water, as well as restrooms. So over the next 2 hours, if anyone needs to avail themselves, I believe we can step back into that area right there. I wanted to note also for folks that since our May 1st meeting, Co-Chair Smedberg and I have appointed 4 additional members to the task force to represent the district, Maryland, Virginia, and the federal government. This is going to help ensure increased representation across the region, as well as to make sure that we have quorums at all of our task force meetings. So with that, let me turn it to my co-chair as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board of Directors and co-chair of this task force. It's really great that you've all been able to take time to join us here today for our first official meeting, or second official meeting, I guess. But today we start something that we haven't done before as a region, elevating the conversation about how to effectively provide and fund public transit in an open, transparent way that looks at the entire transit network holistically. Both WMATA and COG have a responsibility to help lead regional transportation planning, and this joint initiative begins to fulfill that role. Before we get any further, I note that today's meeting is open to the public and is being live streamed on DMVMoves website, which we created to serve as an information hub to keep the public informed of this initiative. If you haven't visited the website yet, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Check it out and share it with your various networks and your colleagues. I think you'll find there's a lot of great information on there already. Now, before I turn it over to our host today here in Arlington County, I would like to, several people during lunch have asked about, well, what about ridership and what about this past weekend? So just a few quick highlights. And this really, I think, stresses, why this initiative is important. So we had 5.5 million for the week of ridership. So that's really, truly significant. We had the highest parade day since 2012. We had the highest weekend. We had several events. It was DC Pride. You had the Nationals game, a soccer game, and other things are happening. But this ridership is not just happening within the District of Columbia. It's happening throughout stations in Virginia and the state of Maryland. For instance, Rockville had a high. In Virginia, Reston, we had big numbers at Navy Yard. I got off at McPherson twice this weekend. I'd never seen so many people in McPherson Square. So that just gives you a quick snapshot of why this is important. Another thing too, talked to a couple people about over lunch. We hit our, Randy, 2 millionth rider, I believe, to Dulles Airport somewhat recently. Yep. So that's, really, really, significant. So thank you for that indulgence. Yeah. We can clap. That's a good thing. So now I'll turn it over to Arlington County Board Chair Libby Garvey and Northern Virginia Transportation Chair Matt DeFronte to offer a few opening remarks.
Excuse me, y'all. I don't have a seat at the table, so I'm going to do it. I apologize because some of you got your back to me. I only have about 2 minutes, and so I brought a few slides. Welcome, everybody. We are honored to have you here. I think it's fairly appropriate. Metro has been changing this region for the last 50, 60 years, and I think nowhere as much as Arlington. We have probably more than any other jurisdiction adapted ourselves to Metro, and that planning's been going on for over 50 years. So we have transit neighborhoods, which are marked on the map. The red part is right where you are here today in Courthouse. Next slide, please. And this shows you what we mean about transit corridors, right? You can see all of the building right along. This is National Landing, Crystal City, and on the either side, you've got houses with trees and single-family houses. So we really keep the dense development by Metro. I know everybody knows that, but it's always cool to see it in a picture. Next picture, please. Slide. And this is National Landing now. Although it looked really urban in that picture with the big high buildings, on the ground, it's pretty pleasant. You can take a bike and get a bike on there. You can get on the bike, ride around. You've got kids with bikes on the sidewalks. It's very walkable. We call livable, walkable. We're trying to build places where people want to be, and Metro really helps us do that. Next slide, please. This is just another picture. I mean, this is in the middle of that real urban area, and with good planning and help, we're not doing it perfectly. This is new. We're getting more and more help about how to make it. Again, it's about making it places where people want to be. And the next slide, please. And this one is just really interesting. So over the last 25 years or so, the traffic has gone down. That's the thing as a percentage, 18%. I think I can't quite see this. My eyes aren't working great. On the next one, we have increased the number of people here, and you can really see that on the last graph. So while the population has gone up, the number of cars has gone down. And you can see at the bottom, such that in National Landing, 24% of the people in the National Landing in 2020 don't have cars. Don't have cars. And that's part of the reason that those pictures I showed you are so livable and walkable. You can walk to parks and you have kids out because there aren't cars everywhere. It's really people-centric. And the other thing that is really good about that, in this region, people have got three big expenses: transportation, housing, and childcare. Transportation we can take care of. If we can provide really good transportation, people can afford better to live here because they don't have to pay for a car. So it has really helped us here in Arlington. Metro is absolutely crucial to our health. I know it's a little different throughout the region, but I thought I'd just get you started what Metro means to us here. And again, we're honored to have you all here, and thank you so much for the work that you're going to be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Garvey, Chair and Councilman Allen, Chair Smedberg, and the COG team. It's rewarding to have everybody together to talk about this critical issue for our region, public transit. As Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, I recognize the value of bringing each of our jurisdictions together to create a unified vision. NVTC, as you can see from the pin, is about to be 60 years old, so just a little bit before Metro Rail. Public transit has demonstrated again and again its value and is central to our economy, community, and our culture. We know a strong transit network makes it possible to have more households, jobs, economic growth, reduce carbon emissions, reduce commute times, reduce barriers to bringing additional jobs, and also help us invest in education and housing. The benefits go from Loudoun to Arlington, from Montgomery to Prince George's, and of course to DC, the center of our region. From the Northern Virginia and NVTC perspective, Metro Rail, VRE, MARC, commuter rail, and even our local buses such as ART here in Arlington, we are at a critical time to act. Our transit systems are rebounding, as we just heard, and many routes are exceeding pre-pandemic levels, but we know the funding model is broken. We also know that our transit agencies work together all the time, but that they can do more together if we have a better foundation. DMVMoves is the opportunity to shape, as we've talked about, a world-class transit network that our region needs and frankly deserves. And I thank everyone at NVTC as well as everyone on this task force and the local transit systems for digging in to do this work. Look forward to working with everyone on this. Back to you.
Okay.
Thank you. To Chair Garvey and Chair DeFerenti, thank you very much for hosting us and having us. We appreciate it. And again, thank you for hosting us here in Arlington. Now, since this is our first task force meeting, we're going to run around the table real fast and do introductions. Here is the ask. Please introduce yourself, the region you're from. There's going to be plenty of time for comments later, so we're all going to test ourselves here. And just a quick round through the table, and then we're going to be turning to Ms. Fernandez and our agenda item after that. So, Jeff, how about I turn to you first?
Sure. Sure. Jeff McKay, Chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors.
Malcolm Augustine, State Senator, Prince George's County, Maryland.
Scott Zerville, I'm the State Senate Majority Leader, represent Fairfax County in 34th Senate District.
I'm Tracy Lowe, and I represent the district on the WMATA board.
Nick Donahue, I'm a consultant supporting this effort.
Clark Mercer, the Executive Director at the Council of Governments.
Mark Corman, I'm a Maryland State Delegate from Montgomery County.
Tara Jackson, CAO, Prince George's County, and County Executive Alsobrooks alternate.
Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council of the District of Columbia.
Good morning. I'm Phyllis Randall, Chair of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors and Chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority.
I'm Sarah Klein. I represent the federal government on the WMATA board.
Kate Stewart, Council Vice President for Montgomery County.
Michael Sargent, Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Commonwealth of Virginia.
Sharon Kirschbaum, District Department of Transportation.
Mark Elrich, Montgomery County Executive.
Christina Henderson, an at-large council member in the District of Columbia and Chair of the Transportation Planning Board for the region.
Hi, good afternoon. Randy Clark, General Manager of Metro.
Obviously not Jason Miller. Christy Daphnis, I'm the current Acting Deputy Associate Director for Management at OMB, as well as the Chief of the Federal Workforce Branch, here as an observer on behalf of the federal government.
Mark Sickles from the 17th Delegate District, Commonwealth of Virginia.
Joe McAndrew, Assistant Secretary at the Maryland Department of Transportation and a Maryland Board Member of the WMATA Board.
Kevin Donahue, City Administrator, District of Columbia.
Matt DeFranchi, Arlington County.
Paul Smedberg, WMATA Board Chair.
And Charles Allen. All right. Thank you all very much. So next we're going to introduce Nuria Fernandez and Nick Donahue. They're helping facilitate the work in our task force discussions. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Fernandez to provide a brief recap of our joint meeting that we held on May 1st and lay out our goals for today.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair Allen. And I too want to acknowledge Nick Donahue. Nick and I will be facilitating this process for the task force. Nick is going to be lead on the 2 advisory groups that you will learn some more about throughout this presentation. Okay, so 6 weeks ago, COG and WMATA, as all of you know, signed an agreement to get us underway to build a better transportation network that could serve this region, not only for today, but also for the future. But the approach is going to be a little different than what you have been through before. I know many of you are thinking, well, we've been here, we've done this. There's 24 studies around what needs to happen in this region. But we're now at a cross point where we need to not only make some hard decisions regarding what it is that we want, and how much it's going to cost, and how we're going to manage that investment. This is the beginning. The beginning is showing up today, being consistent, so that we can carry through each of the actions, activities that would lead us to this final plan of a future, a DMV that moves. The agreement is going to be focused on, first and foremost, we're going to start out by defining the vision for this project, for the vision for this region. We want to develop supporting policies that are going to help frame the type of projects, the type of approach, the level of investment, and craft a path forward with some funding models. Today's meeting, there will be 5 task force meetings. This is the first. Today's meeting is going to be focused principally on getting ideas from all of you on the task force about what your vision, what your perception, what your image of world-class is, so that we can then take those principles and have the task force direct the advisory groups to further develop them. My takeaway from that meeting on May 1st, I can sum up in 3 words, and that is that we want to make sure that you're informed, you need to collaborate, and then you need to lead, because this is all going to rise and fall on leadership. The path to get there is to work together as a region, to understand what it is that you currently have, and that's one of the items that will be covered today is level setting, so that everyone has the same body of knowledge about the number of agencies, the number of operators in this region, who they're providing services to, where the gaps are, where the transit deserts are, and how to better address that so that this region, that the network can flow. What does success mean by the end of today is that, 1, you have what you need so that you can help guide, help direct, and help inform, and then at the end, be in a position to say, we now have a plan, let's make a decision to support that plan. I am going to invite, I believe it's Clark, is going to first come and give a presentation that's going to set the tone for what exactly is happening with transportation, public transportation in particular, in the DMV.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, I think Nuria did a fantastic job setting the table, so I'm going to work through these slides pretty quickly. The first one that's up there is that going back to our May 1st meeting where we talked about the number of points of priorities for this region where transit is critical. Since we're here in Arlington and we have our NVTC board chair, I always like to reference on the prosperous piece just for Virginia, the $1.5 billion in state tax dollars that go down to Richmond each year that can be tied to transit. Of that $1.5 billion, $1 billion can be directly tied to Metro. That's always a really quick reference point that there's a great return on investment in our transit network. And we saw earlier the slide deck that showed some of our largest employers in the world that have decided to locate here in this region, co-located with Metro being a critical piece of their decision making. Obviously, when we talk about the environment, we talk about equity, we talk about health, all of those things are tied to transit. And certainly at the Council of Governments, working with many of you around the table, you as a COG board and your respective boards throughout the region have set some ambitious goals for this region on each of those points. And it's hard to envision how we get there without a thriving and successful transit network. So to that end, you all are here today, quite grateful, and I don't think it should be lost that this doesn't happen very often. And kind of echoing what Nuria said, you have in your binders 20, 30 studies that have been done on Metro. That's just a sampling, quite frankly, of all the studies that have been done. And over the years, folks have looked to other folks to come into this region and help put recommendations on the table. You all are the leaders of this region and are the ones that can arrive at these solutions, and not only arrive at them, but enact them and get them over the finish line. So the organization and leadership, we have the Transit Task Force. We've done the introduction to 2 work groups, and we have Brian Hill and Jack McDougall here today. Their respective groups include all of the relevant stakeholders in this region. And they are, by design, large table with, from the business and community group, our environmental friends, our friends from labor at the table, and on our governmental group, the CAOs from this region. I see Glenn Lee here, the Chief Financial Officer from the district, and all of our transit operators, because while Metro certainly provides a lot of the transit in this region, it is not just Metro, as has been articulated, and we need to find a solution that rises all boats here throughout this process. The task force roles and responsibilities. So we talked about representing the region. I can tell you, I know that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do. We come into these processes cognizant of the transit we have in our own jurisdictions, but we really need to think from a regional perspective, what is best for the region, what makes sense for the transit network kind of writ large. We need direction from you. The staff needs it at COG, they need it at WMATA. Working through Nick and Nuria, I want to encourage, and I know they've been in touch with you and the working group members. They are fantastic, best in the business at what they do, and use them. And be frank and honest and open with them. The more honest we can get, and the sooner we can be open and honest about priorities, about key decisions in terms of where you are or are not willing to go, the quicker we can start trying to find some consensus and arrive at a series of decisions. The be open and transparent piece, I think that applies to everyone. And I will say, starting with COG and WMATA, we need to all operate from the same set of facts and data. So that's what we're doing here today, and hopefully finding some consensus on what that data is and what those facts are about transit. And then ensure success. This is one that's your bread and butter. It's what you do. But we really need to, and I think Chairman McKay, when I talked to him about this process, echoed what many of the members said. They said, look, over the course of my career, I've been involved in many of these efforts that arrived at a bunch of recommendations. I can show you those reports. I don't have the time, frankly, or the interest in doing another process that results in recommendations that are not enacted. So the goal here is to put recommendations on the table that can be enacted. Timeline, we'll get to that in a moment, but it will be different, I suspect, for the district, for Maryland and Virginia, but we all need to figure out what that timeline is that works, provide recommendations to you in a timely fashion so you can get it before your legislative bodies. Nuria mentioned these are kind of the 4 main charges of the task force, and obviously discuss it. And I think we've got it right. There's general consensus, but if we haven't, today is the day to kind of talk and make sure we get our bearings straight. But a vision and system plan. So what is our vision and consensus for transit in this region? What do we want it to look like? Prioritization list, right, is really important. Things get funded if they're prioritized and put into a plan. Not everything can make it into that plan. So let's be Let's have a robust discussion about what level of transit we want. First-class transit in this region, the nation's capital, I think, should be expected, but what does that mean, right? And let's talk about a vision and a system plan. In order to do that, we're going to have a level set today of what encompasses transit in the region. Supporting policies, I think we all can agree we can probably do a better job of coordinating amongst all the different transit agencies in this region. What does that look like? And what are those touch points that folks want to bring up? I think from if you were dropped in here and not from this region, do our fares make sense? Getting around this region, when you look at a map, does it make sense? Or when you go to the Pentagon and see 12 different signs, is it confusing for someone taking transit how to get from one point to the next? And then certainly talking about driving efficiencies. If we have a lot of transit operators using the same widgets to run their business, how do we maintain those widgets? How do we buy those? Are there opportunities to bear efficiencies? Funding, you can't talk about, and this was easy to do, it would have been done already, and this is at the crux of talking about transit in this region, is what is it going to cost to run this transit network, and how do you get reliable and predictable funding? It doesn't matter if it's transit, government, or business. If you don't have predictable funding that you know is going to be there in the future, you can't properly plan for the future. So how do we break this cycle of every year or two going to 3 or 4 boards of directors at the capitals and district and Congress and making our case that transit's worthy of being funded? And the last, obviously, the delivery models there, it's going to be different for different jurisdictions, different states. Let's figure out what action points need to be put on the table, recommended. How do we get there? How do we actually accomplish these recommendations that we're going to talk about? The task force schedule, we've got all the dates out for the task force meetings. They're up on the top piece here. You'll see that there's some initial recommendations that'll come out. That was certainly hearing from some of the members that they would like some of the initial recommendations to mull over sooner than later, depending on their legislative cycles. And then next spring and summer having a final report that will ultimately go back to the COG and WMATA boards to vote on, and then from there go to the respective legislative bodies at the local and state and federal levels. The advisory groups are meeting pretty frequently, and we get back to the previous slide, direction from this task force to your experts that are in your counties and cities and states that know the numbers inside and out, that know how transit networks operate. What do you need from them? Because they're going to be producing a lot of work that's going to filter up for consideration for this task force. So do not be shy to give our staffs and your staffs that encompass those work groups directions as to what you need. There's going to be a couple opportunities, and we'll get those dates soon, to see our transit network up close and personal around the DMV. That'll serve a couple purposes. One, you can it drives home. I was out in the district and Maryland this weekend, saw firsthand the amount of activity there was. I don't think folks need to be sold on that or you wouldn't be here, but we will have some opportunities for folks to get around the region, task force and the work groups together. And frankly, the more time you spend together talking about this, I think the better in terms of getting some fellowship and arriving at a set of recommendations. And that is it. I will hand it back to you, Nuria. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clark, for doing that overview. Now we're going to get into the presentation section of the agenda. And I'm going to ask both Tom Webster from WMATA as well as Kanth from COG TPV to do the presentation. I believe we start with you, Kanth.
Thank you. You said? Okay, thank you all very much. The region, the National Capital Region, is both unique and special in the large number of transit systems and the options it offers to its residents to travel. We have three large, mainly different types of rail. We have the urban rail, commuter rail. We have light rail that's in the works. We have a regional bus system. We have 12 local bus systems, commuter buses. So there's a wealth of transit options in our region. Frankly, very few regions in the country can boast of such a system. But this good system has evolved over a period of time into a very complex system to navigate. It is complex for the riders to navigate. It is complex for the agencies to operate and maintain, and certainly for the funders to fund and keep them at a world-class level of operation. And as a result, I could comfortably say that the system as a whole is underperforming. So While we can quantify the ridership of all of these different systems on the different types of transit, what are the ridership on metro rail, what is it on commuter rail and local bus and regional bus, what the statistics don't show is a very important point, and that is all of these systems are interrelated and they are interdependent. Many of the trips that happen on these systems originate on either a local or on a commuter and go on a regional rail system. So for public transit system, for a region like us, the nation's capital region, for it to be able to fully contribute and to be effective to the socio-economic and environmental goals to being achieved in an equitable manner, they need to be totally in sync. They need to be fully coordinated in every aspect of their system. So why should it be so coordinated? Apart from the fiscal reasons, it is very critical because the users or the riders of the system do not see through the structural differences. They see it as a seamless system. As you can see in these charts, whether it's you look at the population by race and ethnicity, by their income levels, or by the auto ownership, everybody is using all different forms of transit. And they're using it for different purposes. In our region, there are about 20 million trips that happens every single day. 20 million trips happen. Only 20% of that is work-related. 80% of the trips are happening for all of those different reasons. So that means their frequency of use, their expectations of the services are going to be different. That is why they need to be coordinated. One of the things that the people's use of the system, people's travel system is changing. But throughout all of these changes, one thing has remained constant, and that is what their expectations are. There has been a number of surveys dating back to the 90s that show that people have aspired for and asked for frequent, reliable, and faster service. Right? So there are data from other systems, but I'll point to one example from WMATA. Those bar charts on the left show how the ridership grew differently depending on the frequency of the system. The leftmost bar chart shows when it was more frequent, the ridership growth was the maximum. So that, once again, is empirical data that shows how our riders value frequency. The reliability, and particularly for bus transportation, faster service is critical. If the bus is going to be stuck right next to the single occupant vehicle in a congested lane, then it's a wasted investment, and it is a false option and a false choice. Right? So we need to have, those are the basic systems, and there are ways of achieving those faster and reliable trips on the bus systems, whether it is through prioritized bus services or to bus-only lanes. BRT systems is one of the things. The region is doing very well in terms of planning for it, but clearly we are lagging behind on where other parts of the region, other regions in the country are, and honestly where we can really be in terms of BRT system. Where can we be on this system? There's a huge market potential. Recently, there was a data analysis between 2019 and 2023 that looked at the residents in this region. And I said earlier there are 20 million trips happening in the region every day. 88% of those trips have transit as an option, but only 5% of those trips are actually happening on transit. 88% can use transit, but only 5% are using transit. So if I were running a for-profit entity, this is where I would say, this is where I'm going to go and invest. Yes, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. We said there are different systems. There's the complexity, the fare systems, the signage, the service durations, the service frequency, the coverage. But those are, once again, the opportunity to go after that 95% for whom transit is an option and yet are not using. This is just an example of how various systems are operating during different times of the day and for different durations of the day. It makes it very challenging for somebody who is making a trip for 80% of their purposes, which is not work-related. This is another example of the wide variety of design and variation in customer experience. Again, fare policies are different. These are well documented in terms of where there are opportunities for there to be a very coordinated and for the system to be totally in sync. So one of the things we would say, I'm very glad that the DMVMoves Task Force has taken on this challenge. It just needs to be comprehensive and systemic by examining what are the funding structures, what are the uncertainties or the hard to predict, what are the opportunities for service coordination, for collaborating, and what are the plans? What plans do we have to both maintain the system and to grow the system? At the Transportation Planning Board, the federal government has endowed it with the responsibility to compile the projects that we plan to implement for the next 25 years, but with an important catch. All of those projects need to show that funding is reasonably expected to be available. This is all the list that we have. So for a region of 6 million, where we are planning to add another million people and another 1.1 million jobs, that's the size of Austin. The number of people living in Austin, number of jobs in Austin, that's what we are planning to add here in this region. So, but these are all the projects that we have. But we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, because all of the agencies have been looking for opportunities and they have growth plans. And this is just a selection of growth plans that our transit systems in the region have. But there isn't enough funding for it. I would end this by looking once again at the funding opportunity. As you look at the TPB's most recent long-range transportation plan, which looks at this region between now and year 2045, there's $223 billion estimated to be in revenues. $223 billion. 80% of that is earmarked for operations, maintenance, and state of good repair. Just 20% for expansion. Of that, only 6% for transit expansion. That is where the region stands. I think, as I have shown with the market, there is great potential for us to change that metric, to make some investments, and those returns on investments on the socioeconomic and environmental goals will be huge and tremendous if we were to go after it. So with that, I'll pass it on to Tom.
Thank you, Conti, and thank you, Nuria. And Chairs Smedberg and Allen, members of the task force, and Tom Webster, Chief of Planning and Performance at Metro. For the next brief couple of minutes, we'll review some of the fundamentals of transit budgeting and funding to set a baseline as the task force gets underway here. And then we'll highlight a few of the realities and challenges around Metro's budget and financial structure. So as we've discussed, local, state, and the federal government invest in public goods, from things like national defense to transportation, libraries, schools, water, sewer, trash collection, fire, police. These investments are foundations for our economy, providing social, economic, environmental, and other benefits to residents, visitors, and businesses. Public transit is one of these key public services and a key driver of our region's goals that requires public investment. Transit agencies have typically two budgets, an operating budget and a capital budget. Operating budget funds the day-to-day expenses of providing the transit service, bus, rail, and paratransit, making repairs, doing maintenance, providing security, assisting customers. Capital budgets typically fund those state of good repair programs, modernization, replacement, and rehabilitation of assets, infrastructure, and systems. And then when there are opportunities, projects to expand and enhance those systems. Just a couple of key points. With very few exceptions, transit agencies typically cannot spend capital funds on operating costs. The federal government does generally not fund operations other than in emergencies like the pandemic. Many of the funding sources that our region uses to fund transit or are received by the transit operators are not indexed to inflation or otherwise indexed, so they lose value over time. And again, importantly, most large federal grant programs, or all federal grant programs, including the large ones, require local matching funds. So for larger projects, an early step is often identifying that local match for a project. A little bit more on transit operating budgets. So it's typically customers and people around the regions think about the bus operator, the train operator, the station manager, the things that they see. In fact, transit operating budgets are much bigger and broader than that, with a variety of support and behind the scenes activities that drive a lot of the cost. The largest costs is in transit operating budgets are typically wages and benefits for employees, but then also energy to power the vehicles, rail, bus, and paratransit. Operating needs through transit budgets are typically funded by passenger fares and revenues, which are essentially a user fee for the service. Non-fare revenues, so business revenues from things like parking or advertising, leases, and miscellaneous sources. And then state and local funding and investment through financial support from those state and local governments. In some transit environments, there are dedicated tax revenues to that agency supporting the operation. Transit capital programs, again, typically we're funding investment in rehabilitation and replacement of what we've already invested in as a region in partnership with the federal government. So new modern vehicles, maintenance facilities, modernization as a component of those rehabilitation and replacement programs, other improvements, state of good repair activities, and then when, again, the opportunity presents, expansion in that system. Capital needs typically funded by a combination of sources, federal funding through federal formula programs that are offered to transit agencies and regions nationally. In this region, we have the Passenger Rail Investment Improvement Act funding for WMATA's capital program. State and local contributions, generally investments by the governments at the state and local levels. They come in various forms, direct contributions to the agency, and in some locations in dedicated funding streams. There are a lot of programs for federal and otherwise for competitive discretionary grants that offer often modernization and expansion activities. And then debt financing, when there's a reliable stream of funding for capital programs, can often be leveraged in the form of debt. Our region spends roughly $3.4 billion through the operating budgets of our transit operators, and Metro represents about 70% of that. And through the capital programs, about $2.8 billion annually in those multi-year capital programs. And again, Metro represents about 90%, which reflects the size of the infrastructure of the rail system. Across the board, across our region's operators, costs are up. This is largely driven by inflation. So from the period of 2019 to 2024, our regional average growth was just over 7%. Moving briefly to Metro budget realities. So our region came together and avoided the FY25 funding crisis. Really monumental event here. But how do we do that as a region? Additional investment from our state and local partners of about $460 million. A suspending of the 3% cap for a couple of years. We're using our remaining federal relief dollars, COVID relief dollars, as a piece of the solve for next year. You'll see a note here that the remaining pieces of the gap filling of Metro's budget, we've used the language diminishing returns. Each of these is non-recurring or diminishes over time. The first is the use of preventive maintenance funding from our capital program to fill the operating budget gap. Recurring management efficiencies and cost reductions. We have included in the FY25 budget no wage increases for many of Metro's employees. And we've included some targeted service cuts and optimizations and increased fares by about 12.5% on most fares. And that's generally keeping with inflation for this time period. Importantly, because these issues are structural, we will, as a region, face them again and again, beginning in the FY26 process. Metro's operating budget, so just highlighting a few of our structural challenges, and again, repeating some things said earlier, lack of dedicated funding means uncertainty beyond 1 year for a service that's sustained, expected to sustain beyond that. There's no reserve or rainy day fund for Metro operations. We mentioned before the 3% cap and other funding sources are not indexed to inflation. A majority of Metro's costs are fixed and don't vary with the level of service operated, so we have a high fixed cost system. We have different fiscal year starts across the region, which presents some process and administrative challenges. And Metro's legacy subsidy allocation formulas are quite confusing and obsolete and date back many years to a different size system and a different day. These create, again, problems for long-term planning, predictability, and sustainability of the Metro system and transit in this region. Metro's capital program, again, funding sources not indexed. Our multi-year projects and programs in support of state of good repair and the sustainability of the system are subject to annual approvals and appropriations, which again drives difficulty in planning. There's limited capacity to issue debt, and in fact, we will be running out of that capacity towards the end of our current 6-year capital program. Using federal grant programs to pay for operating expenses through the preventive maintenance transfers reduces capacity further on capital funding for state of good repair and system preservation. And we have a very fragmented and disjointed expansion policy that requires full funding from sponsoring jurisdictions, and it is not a very regional approach. So this, again, presents a variety of challenges from a planning and investment standpoint. And to put a finer point on this lack of indexing in capital funding, so PREA, which began back in 2008, 2009, has remained at about that $300 million absolute value in federal funds and state and local match. And of course, as costs have increased and inflation has gone up, the value of that money has dropped. Similarly, dedicated funding set at $500 million a year. With the record inflation and construction cost escalation, the value of that funding has dropped. So you can see the inverse of this with indexed funding would allow for a more sustainable model. With that, we will turn it back to Nuria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Conti and Tom, for that overview. As you all have seen, there's a lot of information, so this can get very dense, and that's one of the reasons why you have your PowerPoint slides, an opportunity to analyze those and ask questions. But as we move through this process, given that we want to stay within the time, be respectful of your suggested time for this session, I am going to ask that you hold your questions regarding the presentations you just heard until after the discussion, if that's possible. I'm hoping that you will. So here are a few ground rules as we engage in this discussion. I want us all to be very present because we've been through this before. You've heard the background on the challenges for Metro. Every operator in this region has challenges, and there needs to be an opportunity to talk about that. We want to be respectful, so as your colleagues are sharing, that you're listening and have an opportunity to allow them to finish, for you to interject, add, or take us. Just want to stay very clear that we want to stay on the discussions for today's meeting. We're not going to try to solve every single issue at the first meeting. There are 4 other meetings where we can do that. Today, we are going to jump right in. You've got the background. We want to get busy now talking about world class, because having a vision is really going to serve as the underpinning of the policies that will help us get that vision, operationalize it, and then all of the priority for projects, programs, looking at what we want, what's needed, how much money is going to be required, how that investment is going to be allocated and managed. So the first thing I would like you to think about, this is the ideation phase, think about is what world class means to you, because clearly there is an important problem that we need to solve. So what does world class mean to you? And as you're thinking about that, think about the images, your own experience, whether it's locally, nationally, internationally, and who wants to be first? I really thought I would see a lot more hands, more table tents going vertically, but Mr. McKay. No.
I think the obvious ones are safety, reliability, accessibility. I mean, those are key to driving ridership and to building ridership. And if you don't have those 3 key elements, you will not have world class, you won't have success. And so to me, those are 3 key, absolutely necessary components.
And thank you for sharing those. And as you know, those words and what they imply have a lot more depth. So if you all think about, when you think about safety, there's the funding implication associated with safety. There's decisions about what are the priorities that would ensure that we're safe, and what projects support that. So yes, I appreciate the words too, but share a little bit more about what you're thinking when the phrase world class, best in class comes to you. What does that mean in the reality of the environment that we are operating in? Okay, we'll go to Kate, followed by Christina.
Thanks. I think I agree with Jeff and those key words. But for me, when I think about our goal and looking at world class, it's that I want public transit to be the first decision somebody makes. So when they're thinking about making a trip to their doctor, to go out to see a movie, to go to work, that their first decision isn't, I'm going to get in my car, but their first decision is getting on the bus, getting on BRT, getting on Metro Rail. And how do we get there? I think it is about reliability, which includes frequency, to know that when I'm choosing this, I'm going to get to that destination. I'm going to get there safely, and that we all know as elected officials that has to do with reality and perception as well as how people feel there. And it has to be accessible. It has to be easy to get to for people with different mobility, and whether or not they have opportunities or challenges. It also has to do with whether, how you present yourself in the world and whether or not you're feeling safe there, and that our metro system and our bus system is accessible to all people. So what I'd like to come out of this with is when our solutions are moving towards this, that our residents are thinking, my first decision when I'm going anywhere in this region is I'm getting on public transit.
Yeah. And, it's always putting yourself in that position where you, from your front door to your destination. And what does that travel, what does that ride, what does that journey look like? And what needs to happen to make it more convenient? Christina, you're next.
Thank you. I sort of took the words right out of my mouth in terms of world-class being that using public transit is not an afterthought, but it's part of the plan from the beginning. And I mean, I'm originally from New York, and so there are lots of people who don't have licenses, don't drive, and public transit that's how you go to the grocery store, that's how you get to school, if you're gonna go out to a game, X, Y, or Z. And I feel like in our region, that is the case for some people, but for the vast majority of folks, there is like a mass sort of web of decision-making before you decide, okay, I'm gonna go with WMATA because it is either the most cost-effective way to get there, or there's not gonna be parking at the other side, right? Like, pick WMATA regardless of whether or not there's a parking garage, is a thing.
Yes, when we look at transit systems and start to compare locations, you always have to think in terms of this region is very large, much larger than dense regions that have higher concentrations in the population. So, Phyllis?
So I'm going to add, I would associate myself with all the words that have been said already. I'm going to add 2 more words. I'm going to add seamless and easy. If I'm on the bus system and I have to change buses 3 times to get to Arlington, and not just change buses, but change to 3 different bus systems, it's 1, not seamless, and 2, not easy. Now I have to go look at the bus system in Loudoun, and then the bus system in Fairfax, and then the bus system in Arlington to get from Prince William to Arlington, or from Loudoun to Arlington, or wherever. So I think we have to have a more seamless system if we're talking about world class. And it has to be easy, because people will make the decision to do, for the most part, what is the easiest thing to do. If you're going to have to study your transportation mode for an hour before you get on it, you're just going to get in your car. Yeah. Just going to get in your car.
Joe?
You beat me to it. I was just going to do a +1. I think, one of the slides Conti showed, I think it was Conti, about unlike other regions, we have many providers, and harnessing the many providers in a strategic way. And it is part technology, part policy to integrate, provide seamless, easy to use. It might not be for every trip, but we can certainly do far better than we are today. And that is us getting out of our own silos and trying to think about how we can strategically develop kind of that overarching umbrella wherever that sits. They do it in Germany. Many of us had a visit from the Catalonia trade delegation last week. They do it there. There's many ways to learn, and that's just a policy prescription decision that we need to make. So,
Paul, followed by Sarah.
Well, I want to say, and we hear this a lot as Metro board members, the frustration people have with the technology piece, specifically fares. Why can't this region come together and have a seamless fare system? So that's one thing. And I think that really creates, helps ease part. And then also coordination when it comes to mapping and communication out. Again, to your point, the technology piece, it's something that I think that we could really come together on. But the fare simplification or fare integration, however that's managed, I think is one thing that we really should focus on for this region. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I echo everything that's been said. I had actually written down reliable and frequent, and then you said reliable and frequent, just as I was writing it down. But I think our riders and the region have been telling us that for years. Every survey, those have been the top 2 things that people have said is important to them in terms of choosing whether to ride transit. So reliability and frequency for me is kind of the line, the North Star that we should always be referring back to. And just another thought, as I've been trying to think about how to conceptualize what we're doing here, there's a concept that I'm sure everyone is familiar with in economics and business, barriers to entry, right? Often used in the context of how hard is it for someone to start a new business in a particular industry. But I'm thinking about it in the transit context, there are a lot of barriers to entry for someone who's choosing how to get around the region. Whether it's going to multiple different websites, trying to figure out different routes or fares. And I think, for me anyway, a helpful concept in thinking about what we want to achieve is to make a system with no or low barriers to entry so that anyone who wants to use it can easily do so. So that's how I'm trying to think about it.
So I'm incredibly encouraged with all the plus ones from the comments, and appreciate everybody's comment and agree with everything said so far. When I think about what does the world-class transit system think like or look like, I'll kind of use my own example of getting here today. I've never been to this place before. Lovely, Libby, thank you. But I live a couple of blocks from Union Station, and so I pulled up the address on my phone to say, all right, what am I going to do? And immediately the first thing that pops up is that it's an 18-minute drive. Well, that seemed really attractive. But I'm next to Union Station. So I know, get at Union Station, jump over to Metro Center, come right here, and literally, I think, walk 10 feet from the top of the escalator in the front door, right? Now, though, I'm privileged to live next to Union Station. If I needed to catch a bus or one transfer on a bus, my calculus would have changed dramatically. So to me, thinking about what that world-class transit looks like is the ability to get across modes. So being able to know that if I'm on a bus, I know which route I'm taking, I know where it's going to be fast, reliable, convenient, and then it gets me to the next one. And I think to the barriers to entry, that's significant. And the 88% of transit trips that could be taken by or 88% of trips that could be taken by transit but aren't, while I definitely want to keep expanding our system as much as possible, there's a good chunk of those rides. They don't actually need to expand anything. We've got to make the system a lot easier to navigate and get people on.
Matt. Oh, who did I miss? So when I think about world-class transit, equity, of course, comes to mind. And so there being an equitable level of access, social and economic access throughout all communities and based on the unique needs of those particular communities.
Matt? That was actually the point, a variation on that is yes, equity for sure. I was going to frame it as affordability based on need, and there's been a broader discussion on fares. We joined Metro in increasing our fare, but we have seen the benefit of the waivers that Randy and your team have really worked on. I'm not claiming, I sort of feel as though we all need to be willing to contribute, and it should be relatively related to what you can afford, while also the broader picture of we need additional resources to fund everything. So I would just, equity, yes, and affordability is how I would frame it, because we've all traveled probably to places where there is a luxury good transit system. And that's not what we're trying to build. But we also need to meet the financial needs before us.
Okay, followed by Tracy.
As a transit super user who also travels nationally and internationally a lot using systems, I'll follow up the luxury remark with, I do want to note just how great the transit system that we have here already is. Not just at getting Councilmember Allen to this meeting, but that, when we're talking about world class, it's not about the shape or the power source of the vehicles. It's about the quality and the connectedness of the overall system, right? That's what I'm already hearing from everybody, that, it's not about only providing one-seat rides in this kind of vehicle. It's easy, the seamlessness could be about easy transfers, both across jurisdictions or between vehicle types, for example. I want to just note that we really do have this here, and that the reason that we're here meeting today is because we as a region already have something in terms of connected green mobility that is worth building on, that's worth fighting for, and that is, I will say personally, this is the cleanest transit system that I have been on anywhere in the world. And as a mom, I really love that. So we are here today to work on this because we are starting from a place of strength, and we can figure this out.
Yes, we're starting from a place of strength. You're absolutely right. I mean, 14 systems throughout this vast square mile area providing services, that is origin destination, not only within intra-county, but inter-county, intercity, intra-cities. So there's a lot of movement that's happening on these rolling stocks.
And that it's not just about WMATA. I took Ride-On to lunch in Montgomery County last Friday, and I was the only person to an 8-person lunch who was on time.
Good for you. Well, we do know that public transportation, particularly bus, can get you anywhere. We just need to make sure that signals and, traffic signals and lanes can allow for that to be contiguous and throughout the entire region in equality. I don't see any other table to, no? Oh, of course.
Add one more thing, something that Tom and Conti both touched on. And I think an example that we've seen recently is when we've worked with the district, or Metro staff has worked with the district in coordination and planning. So how is COG or other groups going to bring people together to start thinking about going past jurisdictional lines when we're thinking about some of these projects, whether it be BRT or whatever it is? I think just want to put that marker on the table there somewhere, because I think if we look at things too parochially, I think it could potentially hamper a lot of what people want to encourage here and strive toward. So that sort of planning and coordination piece, I think, is maybe it's not part of a vision statement per se, but it's something that underlies, all that we do, moving forward. Just sort of put that out there. Yeah.
It is really part of the foundation of a good vision statement. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that the creation of a metropolitan planning organization happened, is to ensure that integration.
But it's also going to take the leadership of these people around this table.
Absolutely.
Who are in direct, whether they be elected or administrative, it's going to take their leadership to do that, and that's why these people are sitting here. So.
Yeah. And that's one of the words that will be emphasized throughout, not only today, but throughout this next 11 months, is the will. And it's not a testament. It's a will to make sure that this whole exercise, this effort, actually results in a tangible plan that can be operationalized, because everyone builds that, coalesces behind not only what it's going to do, but the benefits that it's going to have. I want us to think regionally, act regionally. This is one of those exceptions where you're not act locally. It's really because the benefit of one helps the entire network. That's why it's a network. It's interconnected. And when you have an interconnected network, one can be successful, and you're asking people to transfer from a well-coordinated, frequent service to one where people have to now wait because it may or may not show up. Scott.
Sorry, I can't figure this on. So one thing I just want to know really quick, I know we keep saying region, region, region. I just spent about a week and a half in Japan a year ago. And, you go to Japan, you don't need a car to see the whole island. And you get on a high-speed Shinkansen train that goes 220 miles an hour, city to city, you hop on a regional, then you hop on a bus or a light rail or whatever. We're also part of a broader transit ecosystem. And I think when the Long Bridge opens up here in 8-9 years and the expanded VRE service really gets hopping, with the bidirectional trains 7 days a week, all day long is what they're talking about doing. There's also big possibilities there with people from out of state or people from further down, whether it's Fredericksburg, Richmond, in our area, coming up here to use our transit. So it's bigger than just, I think, our region as well. I know VRE is on the list here, but to me, that's also part of the dialogue.
We always talk about that influence zone that goes beyond where the end of the line is for all of the services, the systems. You have the core, and then it just radiates across this region. But beyond that last bus, when the end of the line for that bus or where the train ends, what happens to mobility? It's very interesting. It's very interesting to watch. So I don't see any other tents up. We have a couple more things that we want to cover, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to turn to Nick.
So I think this has been a really great discussion. I'm so sorry, I forgot about the microphones. I think it's been a really great discussion. And so what, at the advisory groups, we're going to be trying to take some of this discussion that you all have been saying today and then really flesh this out into a fully kind of statement about what the unified vision is for world-class transit and bring that back to this group for your reaction. So I think when Nuria is saying, say more and all these things, that stuff is so helpful for us kind of as the advisory group folks, because then we can kind of hear your additional thoughts beyond reliability or frequency, but what do you mean about that when you say that? Because that's what we're going to be chewing on when we kind of meet. And then we're going to be taking kind of that type of information and then looking at the projects and strategies and other things to try and understand where those gaps are. And so this has been a really, really helpful discussion, and we're going to be obviously working with your teams on a lot of this information to put together things for you all to react to and consider in your next and future meetings.
Yes, trying to figure out the slides, but options, concepts for advancing regional goals. There we go. Okay, thank you. So I know that as a region, you all have established a lot of goals that you want to see, you want to accomplish within your own counties, within your own regional service areas. And as the vision for the future, been lots of back and forth, but clearly the emphasis is increasing transit's modal split. We know that almost everyone has a car because we've seen the DMV numbers, and that's the other DMV, the number of vehicles that are registered in each of the jurisdictions and the totality for the region is significant. There are more vehicles per household than there are people living in that household. So we know that that's happening. We know that public transportation and investment that has been made over the past 50 years is one that continues to show a benefit to mobility, but public transit, the trend right now is that public transit is losing that modal share. You heard from Conti that the region is rich in opportunities. There's public transportation in almost all of the high-capacity corridors and high-quality public transportation, but people are not getting on it. We need to reduce, as part of the goal, is to reduce the VMT. Not ask everyone to give up their car, but certainly to those trips, as was noted earlier, be the people's choice, and that is to be the first choice if that trip can be made on public transit. And then you all have a goal. This goal is much more aspirational than the one that was set for the country by the federal government, and that is to have an 80% GHG reduction in 2050. The government is to get to net zero. That means as you increase, you also decrease, and there's no change. But 80% reduction, that is aspirational. It's a great goal, but that's going to require some major changes, and it all starts with policies. So we talked about world class. We talked about not getting too hung up on what we have today, but to think broadly, to think much broader than what you see today. So while we plan, so we now need to think about how do we get to world class? Where should the investments go? And I know it's a little premature because we haven't given you a list of investments, and Mr. Sickles has something he wants to say. No. I'm sorry, Mr. Ehrlich, sorry. Mr. Ehrlich has something he wants to say. Oh, no. Okay. Let me be, kind of summarize this. On the screens, you see a number of levers. Not all those levers can be moved at the same time. One, there isn't the funding. Two, there isn't the capacity to do that. But we need to start thinking about a priority. And I always laugh when people say, what are your priorities? Because priority is really a singular, because if you have many priorities, then nothing is first, because that means you're doing multiple things. But are there things on this list that you believe should be there? And you don't have to answer this minute, but what are the things on this list, if you could just look at the four, and in your own minds think, okay, if we're given these four, what would be number one for me, and why? Sarah. Oh, no, let me go to Mr. Ehrlich.
Tracy was next, actually.
Oh, Tracy? Oh,
Sorry.
It worked last time. Yeah, it's back. I used to be on the Transportation Board when I was a council member, and I started pushing back then, and I still believe that, we need to deal with parking policy. As long as parking spaces are there, people are going to drive. And because in Montgomery, we can say all we want about the great benefits of Metro, but Metro misses most of Montgomery County. And to get to Metro is not an easy thing. We have a ride-on system, which I think is great. But if you know anything about a ride-on system, it's a lot of loops and wandering through neighborhoods to get people from one end to the other. So if somebody has a car, they often wind up picking that because it's faster and because they can park. I don't like parking pricing because people who look at it, in places that have jacked up the price of parking, it is amazing how much people will pay to park. I'm like stunned at the numbers people bring back. And I know when traffic modelers look at what does it take to get somebody out of a car, they use the device of pricing to tell you how high you have to get people to actually use transit. It is way too high a price, and it's going to leave too many people on the road. We need to flat out adopt mode shares. And all the jurisdictions have to do it together. I've been really willing to do it in Montgomery County, but the argument we will always get is if we do it, they'll go to some other unnamed county in the jurisdiction because they won't do it. And if we don't do this as a region, they will pick the places to let them park as many cars as they want. And a place like ours, if we try to restrict parking, will be the unfavorable place to go. If we all do this together, we get out of a lot of the road building that's projected for the future. It's a relatively cheap fix. I don't want to build parking garages either. It takes up valuable, we have this discussion about valuable space waste, that getting to mode share splits of no more than 45 or 40% for SOVs would move us pretty substantially toward being able to get people into transit because they'd have no other place to get there. I introduced the BRT plan in Montgomery County. It's over 16 years ago. And it ultimately got adopted by the council. It's 110 lane miles of BRT. And it would work. And what the developer said, which is the first meeting I had, was they were interested. They thought you could move people and make it work. But before they gave up the parking, they wanted to see the system in place. You cannot do it in reverse order. You cannot impose parking restrictions unless you can tell them that on this date, we will have the system in place and running, particularly the local stuff like BRT, so that the day I tell you you're not parking, people know that they can actually start using transit to get there. But if in a coordinated region-wide approach, we could effectively deal with some of this that we will struggle to deal with any other way. Because you can't get them off the road, and you stick them in congested traffic to get to their destination, and a bus is slower than a car.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck getting them out of the car.
Yeah, thank you. That's very good. So that means that number 4 would be your number 1. Okay, so then we go to Tracy and then Joe, followed by Christina.
I think, to me, it's pretty obvious that the answer is number 1, right? That, like, through the network of transit providers that we have in the region, we do have pretty good coverage, even if some of it is a little loopy. But that the quality of the service is not frequent enough for people to rely on it. In some places, it is already frequent enough, but getting to a good level of frequency in more places is, I think, from the WMATA experience, we can already see that that's the key to unlocking more ridership. I don't want people to be discouraged by the fact that our region is losing transit mode share. Because of the pandemic, there's been a big shift in terms of where people are living in the region. People are moving outside of the WMATA service area, where service is frequent, but remaining in the region. And that inevitably is going to result in a loss of mode share. So the other piece of this that is critical is to get MARC and VRE to that same kind of service frequency. So maybe like I'm also choosing a little bit, number 3, the idea that we integrate our transit network more in terms of how we envision the service pattern in order to capture more trips. This is super doable.
Yes, mode share should not be the driver, but clearly it benefits transit. We want more transit. VMT is not going down. Yes, there's been a whole the travel patterns have changed because of the pandemic and decisions made after that about how people work. But VMT is going up. Okay, if you all try to keep me honest here. Mark? Okay, so let's go with Mark, who we haven't heard from before, and then Mike.
Thank you. I guess I'm too much of a political hack to love disincentives. I think maybe we should talk about incentives and how to incent people. Why is Metro having record weekend riderships? Because the fares are a lot less on the weekends now, and I believe the parking is free. So we can incentivize people to ride. Metro Lyft is a great example of that. We're giving people who need it discounts. The disincentives are already there. We have pretty bad traffic in the region. We're dealing with a real-world experiment in the Baltimore area right now where the Key Bridge was run into and collapsed. All of a sudden, the Penn Line trains and the commuter buses in that area are having really high ridership. So the disincentives are already there. I'm not sure we, to the county executive's point, can price things high enough to create a big enough parking disincentive. I think we need to talk about how we're going to incentivize people and also maybe tell the story better. And first of all, I recognize that a lot of these would be incentives, right? Frequent service is an incentive, but also advertising, which we don't do a lot of, to show not just to the council member who knows how to look up on his app how quick it is to get from Union Station to here, but for the more average individual who's out there, how easy it is if they are just aware of how frequent trains are running right now. They'll be more interested in it. Many people, because of the pandemic, think of Metro in its pre-pandemic state, which was much worse service, not only in terms of the headways, but just the reliability even within the scheduled service. And that's not the Metro we have today, and they need to know that story. I think a lot of people who live further out, to Tracy's point, are driving into DC 2 or 3 times a week, not 5 days a week, and just aren't bothering with transit because they don't think of it as convenient. I think incentivizing them to get back on is an approach we should be spending a lot of time on.
Okay, so that as we're taking notes, to be clear, number 4, but to create policies that incentivize, not disincentivize. Okay. Now, I'm going to start down here. So Joe, Christina, Mike, Michael, and then we're just going to go down. Phyllis was next after Michael, and then we're going to jump around.
I'll be quick. 2 items. One, I think land use and housing are critical to actually advancing the regional goals. And so, transit is a land use, the success of transit is the success of the surrounding land use by and large, unless you're primarily looking for a coverage system, right? So something about 20-minute neighborhoods or what we call it, that COG has, activity centers or something like that.
Activity?
Yeah. The other one is 3, it's not just the transit agency's role to integrate, right? The DOTs, especially on the bus system, have a huge role and responsibility if we're actually going to see through the vision and see through the outcome. And so I think including the DOTs in terms of like a better bus program and bus prioritization is really important for the success here. Oh, and complete streets.
Okay, so I will note 3.
Any more items?
No, I will note number 3, but then you also added land use, which is, of course, absolutely critical to good public transportation. Christina?
I'm going to go with number 1 on the frequent service piece. I think that goes into the reliability part of it. There are different ages that we're trying to capture here. So for the folks who are going to work, they're going to go to work. It's the after work folks that I think it helps for everyone involved if we're able to either keep them in entertainment centers more, if folks are taking transit out to, what are the various entertainment venues. But there's always a question in the back of my mind if I'm going to take, Metro to a concert is like, okay, what time does WMATA close tonight? And like, is this show going to end on time for me to like make it to the, yeah, exactly. Or is the game going to end on time in order for me to navigate the crowds and make it? And so I feel like if we are going to be all in on this, it has to be like, okay, of course, the game is over and I can now walk over and get on the train and get back to my destination and not have to worry about trying to hustle or cut off my experience because there is no mode of transit for me to get home other than rideshare. Because I feel like right now that's a bigger competition than people are, I think, admitting, is that if it only takes 7 minutes for my Uber to come, but it takes 20 minutes for the bus to come, I'm gonna pick Uber because I feel like it's gonna get me to my destination faster.
Thank you. Okay, so now, as you finish, if you could turn your tent down so that we can know who is left. So we'll go this way. Mike?
All right, some interesting thoughts here. So these options strike me as both very tactical and and almost too generic to be worthwhile to ascertain whether that lever can provide ROI, because if you're adding service where people don't want to go, that might not necessarily be the best use of resources. But at the same time, I think we need, what I am hopeful this group can also put their brains to is grappling with why these levers didn't work before. Because I mean, frankly, the region did all of this in the previous decade from 2010 to 2019. And not only did transit rideshare or mode share go down, total ridership also went down before the pandemic. We also did that while spending more pretty much than any other region per rider. I think that is a fundamental question that we have to grapple with here. It's what we're pulling all these levers, but why are we getting less for our money than a New York, than a Chicago, than a San Francisco? Because in the long run, if your funding is not sustainable, if your expenses are growing faster than the region's economy, you've got a real problem on your hands. And so my hope is that this group can say, okay, well, how can we make more frequent service? How can we make that lever better while also costing less and being more cost sustainable? So while I know I didn't necessarily touch on a single one of those, like I said, I think this group can hopefully take a chance to step back and think not only which levers can we pull, but how can we make those levers better?
Yeah, thank you for noting that point. And just for everyone's information, so the intent is to provide the 40,000-foot view of where the priorities, where the attention should be. The advisory groups are the ones that are going to go diving for pearls. So under other is what kind of captures what you shared with us. Thank you for that.
You want me to go next? Okay.
Yeah, we're just going to go
this way. All right, great. So I know all of the above is not the option, and I appreciate that, but I think I'll, as Joe tried to do. For me, I think listening to the prior discussion around the table, and I want to say, as Michael was just talking about how to think about this, I'm also thinking about short-term versus long-term. And what are some of the things that, I'm not going to say any of these are easy, but what are some things that we may be able to accomplish in the shorter term while working on the longer term items? And for me, that was number 3. As I think about integrating our transit agencies, and I do want to expand it, as Joe said, not just the transit agencies, but our DOT for the customer experience technologies and standards. Building on what Tracy said, we do have a really strong system right now, and we're starting from a good place. And as Phyllis brought up, wanting that seamlessness, that reliability, I think really, looking at if we had to pick one to move forward with and focus on out of the gate, it's number 3.
Great. Phyllis? Oh, oh, okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of comments. First of all, I'm not surprised that Joe brought up land use because that's exactly what I was going to say. I think that I'm actually struggling between whether number 1 or land use would be my top priority, because to bring riders to the system and make sure that people can choose transit, they have to be able to physically get there. And often in the transit context, we leave off land use because transit agencies aren't responsible for land use. There's a limited thing that you can do with land that the agency happens to own. But most land use decisions aren't the transit agency's responsibility. But the beauty of this process is we have a number of people around the table who do have that lens, the land use lens, housing, where does housing go, where does employment go? And there's lots of great models around the region. So I can't quite resist putting that at number 1. And then I do want to say, I don't think that in the last decade before the pandemic, we were as intentional about these strategies as we're being now. And so I think that these have potential today, as we are being intentional about them, to really deliver. And then, yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Number
5, I guess, with for land use.
Other?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to go this way. Phyllis, followed by Mr. Mendelson.
So I'm going to say 1 and 2 in that order. Now, I agree with land use, but I think 1 and 2 keeps the riders we have right now. When we start talking about land use, we're talking about riders that we're going to have in the future, depending on how we build, and that is important. But if we're going to keep the riders we have right now, 1 and 2, I think, are the most important. And if you imagine that you're a nurse and you work the 3 to 11 shift, you walk out of your house and you think, I want to get on transit, but the bus stop is 10 blocks away. By the time I get in my car and drive 10 blocks from the bus stop, 2 things have happened. 1, my car is warm. It's the middle of January, and I'm not getting back out of my car. And 2, Luther Vandross is playing on my system already, and I'm good with that, and I'm not getting out of my car again. I'm not just doing that. And so 1 is important because that person that goes to work at 3 gets off at 11. When they come off at 11, they have to have some place, they have to be able to come back home. So, yeah, the concert's one thing, but you go to a concert once or twice a year. You go to work every single day. So you got to come back out at 3 o'clock and be able to get on the system to get you back home. And so that's why 1 is important, the increase these services. But the expanding to more places is important because, again, if I have to drive too far to my bus or to my metro, then I'm going to stay in my car. I mean, we have to think like real people think. People are not going to get out of their car in the middle of January and then jump on transit if they're already in their car. With the exception of what Ms. Jackson said, and that comes to the equity issue. If you don't have a car, you're going to have to walk to that bus stop that's 10 miles away, 10 blocks away, and walk back. And the only way you get to that equity issue is to have more places. And so 1 and 2 in that order, they're very close, but those are the 2 first ones. That gets you to the equity issue. That gets you to keeping people we have right now on the bus system right now. We will deal with land use later when it comes. But let's get that nurse to and from work from that 3 to 11 shift every single day first.
Thank you. So I'm speaking because I completely disagree that number 4 should be the highest priority, that we disincentivize other modes like driving before we incentivize modes like transit. I think it should be the other way around. So number 1, for me, number 1, then number 3, then number 4. We have to make it more attractive. What we so often do in government is we start with how can we make things unattractive, and we'll get around to things being attractive. Other way, in my view, it should be the other order. Make it more attractive, then make it less attractive to be driving. I agree with expanding to more places, but there's investment there, especially if we're talking about Metro Rail. We want to increase ridership. Didn't we see slides that said something like 80% of people who are close to transit are not using transit? So we've got a whole lot of ridership that we can attract before we start spending millions or billions on expanding to more places. So I would say what did I say, 1, 3, because that deals with the seamlessness, the Charles Allen experience, that's what I'm going to call it, and then number 4.
It's no surprise that most of you are defaulting to number 1, because given the capacity that's already there and the lack of service, the lack of use. I know that Mr. Augustine was next.
Okay,
Yes?
thank you. So for me, I feel like I feel a need to better actually understand the trips that are out there before doing any of this. The trips that, you know, there's a big green circle here, and just because it's more frequent, if like we've talked about how ridership has changed, it may be more frequent, but at a time when people don't need it. So, yeah, and we know, we also not sure about the places, or rather we can go to other places, but if there's nobody who needs it there, then, you know, kind of what good was that? So what I'm really asking, or where I'm going with this is, I feel that we really should spend time to really understand the trips and the needs that are out there. And then also just to better understand why people are not choosing still. I mean, we've done it many times, but I feel like that before really being able to really give a good answer to this. So that's just my contribution.
No, thank you. That's a very good point. And as a matter of fact, we are going to be looking to all of you and the support that you have at the local level to provide the information. It's really about transparency, understanding the service and why that service is at the level that it is, because it's really the service that is dictating, that is agreed on, that is dictating where where the buses go and how frequent they go there. Okay, Mr. McKay.
Sure. Before I reveal mine, and I wish I could just do 5, but I would just say a couple things, a couple notions I want to support. First is the issue of disincentivizing and incentivizing. I mean, think if you live in a suburban area in our metro system and you want to use the metro rail and you don't have bus systems, so you're driving to the metro rail, the first thing we do is charge you to enter the parking garage to even consider transit. Seems backwards when everywhere around those parking garages you can park at places for free, but not at the metro station. So that's one thing in terms of incentivizing, especially in the more suburban environments that we have. The second thing is the land use piece, I think, is really important. We have to be bold. We have to utilize the existing system we have to the maximum extent possible, and we're leaving too much on the table. We're not building enough affordable housing that's accessible to transit. We're building too much housing where people aren't using transit because it's their only option. They're using it at their convenience, and a lot of times the convenient thing is for them to go down the garage and get in their car. And that's wasting transit-oriented development space. So we have to be bold with our land use plans. We have to take seriously when you're building near a major public investment like transit, us local governments owe it to the system to make sure our land use patterns drive ridership into, whether it's at a rail station, whether it's along a BRT line, and be bold to have BRT lines, that we think through that as local government. So I definitely support those two notions. But to me, the most important lever on here is number 3. I think the perception that transit has is driven in a lot of cases by who you know that rides transit. And if the experience they had one time was bad, think about yourself as a customer. You have a bad experience somewhere, you're likely to say, screw that, I'm never trying that again. If you have the Charles Allen experience that you had today, you become our #1 advocate. But to have the Charles Allen experience, you have to have maximized transit agencies' customer experience, first of all, use of technology, which was done, and have standards in place that make it easy to use our system. And Chair Randall was mentioning this earlier. You know, if you don't understand, can't comprehend, your barrier to entry is the system is too complicated for me to understand. And understand a lot of our riders live complicated lives. They don't need another complication. So if our customer experience and technologies aren't pointed towards improving the perception of transit, making it easier for people to get into it, then all of these other things fail. Because think about it, the largest incentivizing factor that we have to put more money into transit is because a lot of people in our region are happy with it and want to use it. You're not going to have that if you're not successful in item 3 here. And what does that lead to? That leads to more frequent service, more people who want it, calls on us to expand service. Your land use plans lead to, we need better bus systems and integration so that we can see the metro station almost from our housing unit, but on a bad weather day, we're going to get in our car. Why? Because the bus doesn't come enough. And so you build those other pieces if you can master item 3 on here, which is fully within our ability to achieve and actually does not take massive, massive new revenue to be able to do. And so to me, it's the driver of perception. Unfortunately, we live in a world a lot of times where perception is a driver of the reality of what we have to do.
Yes, and singling out the customer, which is the reason that we're having this conversation, is really about what is the experience in this new world of best class that these customers want and we should give, and we should focus and aim at. There is a survey, and we'll talk a little bit more at the end, that will be going out to all users and others, trying to better understand if they use the system, if they don't, why not? And that would help to start to inform and guide the next steps on the decision-making. We have about 20 minutes, and we still have to answer some questions for those of you who have them, so we're going to go through. Mr. Allen, want to get to the ones at the end that had their tents up first? No, if you, yes, Mark?
So many people said things that I agree with, but my interest is to making the system we have now the most robust system we can. And that's planning and development, and that's ridership and everything. One capital project that affects my district is the tunnel in Arlington. Even though I don't live near Arlington, I represent a lot of Blue Line riders, and the headways are too long there, and we need more access in that tunnel to get people into the city. And we only I think it's 26 trains per hour that can go through the current one, and so I think that's one capital project that would help make the system we have now more robust. Secondly, when I knock on doors, and I ask people, if I get into the conversation about where they work, I will ask them, do you use our metro system? And oftentimes they say no, and then oftentimes I'll ask why, and they say that they don't think it's safe. And they heard of somebody getting stabbed. They don't want their spouse to ride it. Maybe they'll ride it, but they don't want their spouse to ride it. And this is a long time ago now. This is not in this recent crime wave we have right now. And so as Chairman McKay was saying, perceptions really make a lot of difference. And I do agree with Dr. Lowe about how great a system we are. But there are if you walk up to the Huntington Metro stop in my district and ride to the Caps game at Gallery Place, those are not exactly beautiful experiences going in that station or coming out in the middle of the city. Either one of those things. And then you get out and walk through a cloud of marijuana smoke. This is not something suburban people like that much. And so there are alternatives. If there weren't any alternatives, maybe none of this would matter so much, but people there are ways to get around without using this. So as several people have said, we have to make it as attractive as possible and reduce the headways. And I think it'll take care of itself over time, but we've got to make it work the best as we can. Thank you.
So you're number one?
Number one.
Okay.
Not opposed to some of these other things, but
Not,
yeah.
not to rush you all, but we have to go into public comment in about 3 minutes, so.
I'll be very brief. I'm going to go with number 5. You mentioned customer experience in number 3, and I think that there needs to be a customer experience overlay, a targeted customer experience in 1, 2, and 3. For us, as the region's largest employer, customer experience is employee experience. And so we're interested in looking at this from the perspective of how do we provide the most frequent service that's needed in the places where it's needed, where and how do we need to expand transit, and how do we integrate that customer experience overall.
Thank you.
I'm just also note, I mean, federal employees can basically mostly ride the system for free using smart benefits, but they're not. So we have to figure out the root cause for why that is the case.
Okay, let's see. Let's come down this way, Kevin.
A two-part, I'll be very quick. The first part is sticking within the rules of the game, which means I would go for number 1. I think it's the most direct path to be able to maintain customers we have, win back customers that use us less frequently, but still have a connection to a metro, is the frequency of service. I think bus rapid transit very much is about frequency and reliability. And to me, that has the most significant effect for individuals who've already know how to navigate even a complex system. If the service isn't reliable enough to be arriving when you think it will, they're going to defect to other modes. I'd just like to finally just make a point, reiterate the point about financial sustainability. To me, foundational to all of this is being able to have Metro's cost curve be consistent with what our revenue and economic growth is as a region. The harder we are, the more successful we are at that, the less frequently we have to pit WMATA service against other very important priorities we have as a region. If we're able to be successful at that, it's a much easier path to achieve items 1 through 5 here.
Okay, thank you. So now we're at the 150 mark, which now is for public comment. So I would ask if there are some thoughts, because we're going to, after the public comment, we'll close out. So if there's some thoughts that you want to hold off, but share them now if we can get in.
So for me, 1 and 3 are tied as the top priorities, and I just would say that we need to be opportunistic. I'm from Arlington. Dash's success is an example of finding the right nexus. I believe in induced demand, but induced demand is really working in Dash's case in Alexandria, so that's why 1 and 3 are right at the top for me.
Yeah, I'll add my name to what Chair McKay said. I mentioned technology earlier. I think lever 3 is the most important at this point. I think, what Metro has done, Randy has beat it over our heads at the board level about frequency and reliability, and the numbers have shown what that does. But number 3, I think, is something that is extremely important. That perception piece, the integrated technology piece, is going to be really key. And there was a slide earlier about how things look. What about if we all had the same signage and the same thing, so people aren't looking at 10 different branding, whatever it is. Yep.
Okay. Mr. Allen?
To me, the Charles Allen Experience sounds like a band name, but if we did have a late night Saturday concert, we would be able to get home by Metrobus 24/7. A couple of quick thoughts before we move on. I want to associate myself with Delegate Corman's comments around the incentive versus disincentive, and I think it got picked up by some others as well. I do think that framing is more appropriate and can be more powerful. I also think as we look at this, we know already greater frequency means more riders, right? So we've got the proof already established around that. So I think that's why we might kind of lean towards number 1. I would say that it would be most beneficial, I think, to this task force, as we then have our different working groups do their work, that these different levers can actually serve different purposes or different audiences. So what I mean by that is, If we are talking about, we want to help have existing or sometimes riders ride more, we might pull some levers. If we're trying to attract new riders, we might pull different levers. If we're trying to change our land use so that a whole nother round of residents are closer to transit and start using it, that's maybe some other levers. So I think it would be beneficial for the task force if our working groups kind of think in that way as well, to help us think about what our different target audiences are. That might help us think through which lever. Because I think that will help us significantly. On the third one, I will add to that, right now in the district, for example, we're going to be winding down the DC circulator bus system. And I have a lot of residents who depend on that and say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't have my circulator anymore. And I said, well, do you care about the wrapper on the bus, or do you care about the bus? Like, if you had a WMATA bus running the same route at the same time, do you care? Every single person. No, I'd be good. I'm good. So it's as we think about that integration of the customer experience, I think that is crucial, and that's why I've harped so much on making sure we have that transition plan for the circulator to WMATA, because at the end of the day, I just want that bus service. So I could pick all of the above.
These are all very, very good.
So, yep. Sonaria, thank you for facilitating that, and appreciate everyone's comments. Some really valuable things we heard here today, and hopefully, again, in that spirit of cooperation and collaboration, we can take it all in and understand where people are coming from. So we received a lot of information today. We've laid a good groundwork and a good foundation for our current regional transportation landscape and what is needed to move forward in this process. Just a few things before I turn it over to Mr. Allen again. Next week, the Government Partners Advisory Group and the Community Partners Advisory Group will be meeting to begin their work. We'll be hearing updates, frequent updates and recommendations from both groups at our next task force meeting and throughout the process. In July, the COG Board of Directors will be discussing and providing input to the DMVMoves at their leadership retreat. Okay, so that's it for our next steps, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Allen for our public comment.
Thank you very much. As like all of us are a part of public meetings, we want to make sure that there's opportunity for public comments. One of the things we're going to do is, for comments that we receive in advance moving forward, we're going to make sure that those can be provided to our task force members as well as posted on the website in advance. Individuals also have the opportunity to provide a public comment in person at today's meeting. We have 3 folks that signed up. So I'm going to turn to those and call them in order. Each person will have 90 seconds. We do have a timer at the podium. And I'm just going to call folks in the order in which they had signed up. And of course, the public is welcome to submit comments to the task force here, which we can help summarize and be able to be included for task force members. But Jack McDougall, who is with the Greater Washington Board of Trade. Mr. McDougall, if you want to come up, we'll have you speak first.
All right, great, thanks. And thank you for the opportunity to comment. My name is Jack McDougall, President and CEO of the Greater Washington Board of Trade. And as mentioned earlier, I will be chairing the working group of community partners. Without getting into any strategic or technical issues right now, I just want to congratulate everybody here around the table. Sarah, to your point, what is different this time is it's deliberate. We've been at this now for 60 years, and it's time for us to really come together and solve the problem. Because it's really impeding on our ability to compete. It's not just about a world-class transit system, but it's about a world-class economy. Our ability to attract talent, attract investment, retain investment, to reach out to our underserved communities and under-resourced communities and make sure that they can participate in the economy. All of these things really matter here. For the first time, we've started to lose a little bit of our competitive edge, and we can't allow that to happen. So we've got to invest in the infrastructure we need to make sure that we can maintain our global competitiveness, and that's really critical. I'll end it there, 60 seconds. So thank you all, and I look forward to working with you on this. We can't fail.
You get a gold star. Thank you very much. Next, we have Stuart Schwartz for the Coalition for Smarter Growth.
Thank you very much for this opportunity and for your commitment to transit and our region. Hearing today's comments, I'm very, very hopeful about your commitment to creating a bold, new, and integrated transit vision and plan for our region, and in prioritizing dedicated funding for that transit vision. As you know, we've been around for 27 years and advocate for walkable, bikeable, inclusive, and transit-oriented communities. They're the most sustainable and equitable and competitive way for our region to grow. You also have mentioned many of these things, but I think it's important to emphasize that we have just 6 years to slash our climate emissions by 50%. You've committed to do so in our local and regional plans. You've also heard that electric vehicles won't be enough. We won't get enough of them fast enough, so we have to reduce the amount that people have to drive. For this, we need transit and transit-oriented development. Access to frequent, affordable transit is key for access to jobs and allowing people to escape poverty. Affordable transit with affordable housing results in lower combined housing costs, greater family household security, and the kids even learn better in school from that security. Our transportation network, we know, would not work without our frequent and extensive transit. NVTC has done great data provision for that. And let's not forget that transit is orders of magnitude safer than driving. I do thank all those who emphasized land use. Our Blueprint for a Better Region at CSG and the commitments you've made through COG are all about a network of transit-oriented communities. We can afford more sprawl. We can also move very quickly to create 15-minute neighborhoods for safer walking and biking. So our transit must be frequent, reliable, affordable, easy to use, extensive, and tied to compact, walkable communities. As Jarrett Walker has said, frequency is freedom. I think all of you said these things today, and that is just terrific. Let's move forward, and thank you very much for having us at the table with you as well.
Thank you very much. And next up, we have Jason Stanford with the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment today. So my name is Jason Stanford, president of the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance, a partnership of business and community leaders from across the DC region who support improving our region's multimodal transportation network. First, I'd like to thank WMATA, COG, and the region's elected leaders for convening this group to evaluate the long-term needs of our region's transit system. The success of this effort is essential to the long-term economic success and competitiveness of our region, as Jack mentioned earlier. But in order for this effort to be successful, I think we need to acknowledge the scale and scope of the problems and really in order to identify solutions. And one of those challenges that was talked about today is ridership. Average weekly Metro Rail ridership is still around 63% of 2019 ridership levels. That's more than 200,000 fewer trips per day, 1 million fewer trips per week, and 4 million fewer trips per month. And those numbers only increase when compared to a decade ago. Why does that matter? Well, when we saw the presentation today, we were looking at least $100 billion in unfunded transit capital needs over the next 25 years. That's an additional $4 billion per year from the DC region, or around $800 a year for every man, woman, and child in the DC region. When Metro received $500 million per year in dedicated funding in 2018, that money was projected to last into the 2030s. Now it's projected to run out in 2028. When we're asked to pay an additional $4 billion per year, we need to be very clear and realistic about what's actually needed for our region and what's that's going to cost. And I hope that we'll continue to evaluate and look at what makes our system financially sustainable for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. All right, that's going to conclude our public comment portion. Let me turn to Ms. Fernandez, and then I'm going to adjourn us after that.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, not quite adjourning yet.
We're not adjourning.
Just before you adjourn, I want to do one thing.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to just extend my appreciation to all of you. This is exactly what we wanted to get started, and that is hearing from you all where your level of understanding of how this region works. And one of the things that I would ask is that you work with your local jurisdictions, the operators, the agencies, to better have a further dive into how they're operating, what the efficiencies and opportunities are, and ridership. Because I think as everyone comes back and shares, the better information we will have. So transparency is top. I'm going to ask Nick if he could just confirm for the group what the task force charge to the advisory groups, which will be meeting next week, is. And it's really a collection of what we heard here today.
No, thank you so much, and I really appreciate kind of doing this, because as we get going, we want to make sure we are doing the work you all want and bringing back to you the things that you're expecting. So we want to have no surprises on what we're bringing back to like when we do that. So I've really heard three kind of key things based on kind of the discussion today, but also the presentation and the work plan that we're going to really look at with the advisory groups. The first thing is obviously putting together the full statement on the unified vision for world-class transit in the region. And so that will be what we tackle at the first advisory group meetings, is really starting that work and hopefully getting as far as we can there. I think the second aspect of that then is going to be, once we have that, looking at our existing system and kind of hearing the feedback, particularly to, I know Nuria's question of pick the one thing you want is not a fun question, but it's a really useful question for those of us who are going to dig into the details, because it kind of gives a sense of, we want all these things, but what's your priority? And so as we look at the existing system with that unified vision, where's it falling short? And what are the policies or projects and strategies that can help address those gaps and advance them? And I think someone also mentioned kind of the temporal aspects, so like what's immediate versus maybe midterm as we think about some of those things. Obviously, some of those things, including maintaining our existing system, will have cost associated with that. And so then also taking a look at potentially funding models and other things to give examples and feedback to you all in September so that you can say, this is something we're interested in exploring more, or this is something we don't want to really explore more. And clearly you all told us that today on a number of items. I like incentives, I don't like disincentives, et cetera. We expect you to keep that up, but that is really what the advisory groups, based on the discussion today, see as the charge from you all. And I'm saying that out loud so you can correct me if you think I have that wrong.
So thank you. I hope everyone,
Nick, I think one additional question, which I think we've heard today, is just understanding why we are where we are now with trips having fallen, not just since the pandemic for, I think fairly obvious causes, but then prior to that, why was transit mode share declining, but also why were overall trips and trips per capita declining while costs were going up, while service was going up. And just understanding, okay, we've tried a lot of these levers. Why didn't they work in the past, and how can we improve them to work in the future?
thank you. Okay, back to you.
All right. I was going to be adjourning. Mr. Clark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to highlight this morning, Metro released the 2024 Benefits of Transit Report. Came out this morning. I just want to highlight that. Everyone here will get a copy. It's going to be pushed out very publicly later, a lot today. Highlights 3% of our land in our region now has 30% of all property value in our region. 40% of all jobs are within that 3%. And it generated $3.2 billion of tax revenue for local jurisdictional governments. So that just got released today. It talks about environmental benefits, equity benefits, all the things that our regional transit system brings together. So I wanted to just highlight that will get out to everyone later today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So that is going to wrap for today's task force meeting. Thank you to everybody for your time. Thank you to all the staff that put together all the presentations. I think everybody gets a clear sense also of the opportunity and the charge that's in front of us. So I appreciate everybody's time. Our next task force meeting is scheduled for September 23rd.
The meeting hasn't quite adjourned.
And they're so excited for it to be over, but it's not over yet.
Yes.
All right, our next meeting is scheduled for September 23rd. Be on the lookout for also read-ahead materials and everything that'll come between then. I want to extend our thanks to the working group as well. So they're not sitting necessarily at the table, but they're going to be doing a lot of work. So just a quick thank you to all of them. And of course, to Arlington County's board, thank you very much for hosting us in this space. We really appreciate that. With that, now the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I'm going to give them so there were a couple of slides that we did not cover, but the reality is to really run, kind of have a